The Blockchain Breakfast podcast is sponsored by Crazy 8 Token, the newest payment solution for casinos and their customers in emerging markets around the world. Crazy 8 Token is powered by the Casino Coin blockchain. For more information, visit crazy8token.com. And also, Futurist Conference, Canada's largest blockchain and emerging technologies event. Register today at futuristconference.com for this virtual event happening November 11th and 12th. Welcome to the Blockchain Breakfast, gentlemen. I'm Ross McDonald, and with us is David Gokhshtein and Oz Sultan. So, how have things been going for you lately?
A little nuts, but good. Let's see. We've got a ton of canvassing going. I'm just doing like massive campaign ramp up inside of the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, busy on weekends for you.
Yeah. This weekend's going to be pretty busy. I just ran like 12,000 more pieces of material. And then I've got door hangers coming out next week. We've got to do 4x6s. Posters come right after that. So, we're going to start kind of blanketing the entirety of the area. Then I've got the Get Out the Vote guys are started now, but we're going to ramp up to about 10 teams, 15 teams inside of probably about a month. And there's fundraising that I'm still doing. So
I love it.
It's all kind of running parallel path. And then, helping pack out a bit and doing some work with Radiologics. So,
wow, you're spread across a number of projects. That's fantastic. I was reviewing your candidate, your topics that you cover there, and it's interesting that some of your competition, they really don't even touch onto some of the topics that you're promoting.
We've started putting together policies for all these things, and a lot of it's based upon, let's look at what has been problematic here for kind of like the past decade, and the more and more we start looking at it, it's the same issues. You have they're all interlinked. Like the educational system feeds into the prison system, the homeless system feeds into this perpetuation of people staying in the Department of Homeless Services. So if you can start fixing these things and start allowing people to have a leg up in life, and then the same thing goes for the housing. The way that they've designed a lot of these things is very problematic. Poor ventilation, mold issues, lead paint. I mean, this is just kind of consistent problems that haven't been fixed inside of decades. So you start tackling these types of things, and you start moving the needle. And then the remainder of it is, if Black lives are going to matter, Black economics has to matter. And what that really means is, if we can remove that ceiling, that sort of virtual ceiling that's there, and actually bring in the jobs, and part of it's tech, some of it's light manufacturing, and good of its skill, a good more amount of its skilled trade. But it's kind of like absolutely necessary to get this stuff in, because when you look at pretty much any urban or rural community across the United States, it's the same problems. So you have housing problems, you have job education problems, and then you have accessibility and mobility and the actual job problems. So we can train people, we can get them there, we can get a little bit more capital in their hands so that they're mobile. You start fixing all of the systemic problems that exist inside of the community. And then, Harlem is reasonably affluent, but what we've had is with Department of Homeless Services and a variety of other things, you have a lot of just a lot of impoverishment that just ends up on the edges when you have community boards dropping methadone clinics right next to new developments. You know, there's questions to be raised, and what we're just looking to say is that, like, look, because my district is Harlem, Hamilton Heights, but it's parts of the Upper East Side, Museum Mile, and the Upper West Side, really all the way through the Museum of Natural History. You know, there has to be more that we could do, and the big issues are those issues, and the homeless problem too. It's gotten worse with COVID, and that would tie into like really the last thing, which is, you know, fixing the sort of like the child services programs in the state, because with COVID we've had a bunch of parents dying and kids are disappearing into the system, and you know, these systems have a tremendous amount of problems that feed back into homelessness, that feed back into just systems that don't allow people to succeed. And if we could really kind of focus on tackling these types of things, that's going to just radically change what we've got here.
It's interesting to me how, you know, you have this real connection and this sense towards people and not so much worrying about, you know, actual other topics. It's like you're focused on people, you're working back from there. Like when you talk about Black Lives Matter, I see this consistent theme where access to information, access to education and
Mhm.
opportunity is so important. And do you think that that is something that is really should what should be targeted for the ground floor of change?
The ground floor of change in America really has, it's like, let's look at all races, okay? And let's look at the fact that there's an economic ceiling on a lot of races in this country. And if you really want to make every life matter, you know, as people talk about, what you're going to do is you're going to solve those economic issues. And look, this really goes back to policy that came from the Clinton administration, because what you used to have is when you had a lower minimum wage, people were able to get government benefits. So they were able to get housing benefits and they were able to get food benefits. But what happened was this is really the Clintons. They had promised to unionize workers, and this was, you know, in the 90s. And what they ended up doing was they said, let's push for an $18 minimum wage. Well, when you push for an $18 minimum wage, you take people who already have Medicare and a variety of other things, and you now say, okay, guess what? You got 18 bucks. But you're making too much money to get any benefits for housing and any benefits for food. Oh, and by the way, you got to pay for your own health care. And when you look at, you know, what has happened in between that and the ACA, like it's disenfranchised a lot of people, because a lot of people are like, how am I supposed to pay? You know, it's like, I'm not making that much. I'm not getting any of the benefits I was getting before. I'm struggling now. Some of these organizations were unionized, and they ripped out the unions. Like, look, do you know what closed down half of the the food access points, the shopping centers, the grocery stores, was the fact that when they detonated the unions and they started increasing the salaries, everyone who was doing okay basically got thrown upside down, and then all of these grocery stores couldn't afford to hire people at that rate, and they ended up closing down. So all of a sudden we get food deserts, we get food insecurity, and this is over the course of like 25 years. And this is all poor policy and bad policy. So if you want to change these things, you know, you have to look at like, and it's going to be hard once you've already flipped the minimum wage pieces. But you know, one of the things that I've done is we're launching a nonprofit called HarlemOz.org. I'm working with a couple of health shares companies. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this, but there was a thing for a long period of time called Christian Health Shares. And so basically what it is it's a mixture in between catastrophic coverage, which is just kind of like, you know, when people carry that very minimum coverage, if they just have to get into the hospital, it covers all of that stuff, plus kind of like a reasonable midline care program. Okay. And so you've got that on the one side, and then we've got a elder care program that I'm going to try and bring in through the charity. The elder care program is free, and that's subsidized by the government. But the program that's for anyone under 65, the interesting thing there is that we could take some of the expenses that they have or what they were paying under the Affordable Care Act, and we can reduce those. Like in New York, if you're a family of four, let's say you're just a couple, okay, because I always use the family of four example. But let's just say you're a couple and you're paying your own health insurance on the exchange right now, and you have like silver or bronze, which is, you know, okay coverage, but you still have a $10,000 out-of-pocket deductible every year. You're paying like 1,200, 1,300 bucks a month just for the luxury of having that.
That's a
So
lot.
yeah, when you bring in a health shares program, what you can do is reduce that to somewhere between 400 to 600 bucks, and that's significant.
Mm.
So we're going to try and do that through the charity. But the comprehensive focus that I have is that if you really want to rehabilitate the community and you want to fix the community, it's got to be a mixture of what I call Frederick Douglass Republican policies. And, you know, that's why I'm using the term reform Republican, okay? Because when I look at the policies that took my community apart, they are Democratic policies. And we're not sitting here and lambasting the Democrats, which a lot of people do. This stuff happened, okay? We're in 2020, but we do have an opportunity to change this. And, you know, when we start thinking about like the blockchain aspects of this, okay? That's where a lot of the policies I'm going to be pushing are going. And I already have people researching, you know, how do we put legislation together for that? I've worked on, you know, blockchain legislation with hemp in the state of Rhode Island. What I want to do here is in New York State, and Gokhstein can attest to this kind of stuff. Every time you've got old ladies with houses, and that's what typically happens, okay? Because, you know, the men, we don't have the longevity of women, and you go to any community across New York, whether it's a Latino community, a Black community, a Jewish community, a Polish community, a German community, what have you, okay? Muslim community, you can just keep going. What you end up is you end up with a lot of property in the hands of, you know, elderly women. And what we have in this state is a lot of deed theft, okay, where people will literally, companies will come in, they'll prey on these elderly women, and they'll steal the properties off of them. And so this is going to become especially problematic now into, you know, when we have mortgage defaults starting next year, because this whole COVID epidemic is going to go on for easily like another 12 to 16 months, right? And so the goal that I have inside of that is if we can bring the blockchain and drop the blockchain from a policy perspective, not only can we protect the ownership of housing, okay, but what we can also do is we can ensure better and fair taxation, because I'm not sure if any of you guys are aware, but they passed this a couple months ago from Albany, and all your property taxes went up. And they went up anywhere between 1.6 to 2.3% across the state. So the question I have is, okay, you just raised property tax. That's a lot of money. Where's that money going, right? So what we can do is we can afford through that, not just the deed ownership and the deed documentation, but a little bit better transparency in terms of taxation. And I think that's what a lot of people want. Because at the end of the day, as New Yorkers, we pay some of the highest taxes in the nation. You know, just as in the city alone, it's 11%, okay, on top of the federal. So when you start looking at what a lot of people are paying, anyone who's making a moderate income, you know, up to 135,000 in this city is probably paying about 40, like pretty close to 40% tax.
But Oz,
So,
that's why you see a lot of people, and uh, I don't believe in mainstream media either way, but you see a lot of people are moving the hell out of here. Like I have friends that I just talked to. Forget about the media. I'm talking about friends that are fleeing New York to go ahead and live in, let's say, Jersey or Long Island, or if not those states, they're just getting out of New York in general. You know, just to be away from the tri-state area. I mean, just because of that fact, you just mentioned 11%.
mhm.
Like we make a lot of money, but we still get taxed hard. What is it? Us and California, we get destroyed with taxes.
But
Yeah.
what's it like for you guys as New Yorkers, where we have these fundamental problems and you have large population. That's why, COVID hit you so hard. And then we have the other side of it where people are like, buy Bitcoin. And it's like those are two different worlds.
No, they're the same worlds. One of the theories that I have is that if you want to solve a lot of the racial inequity issues, you have to invest your way into basically buy your way into the equity of equality. And a lot of that comes down to when you look at poor Black, poor brown, poor white communities across the country, what is the one thing they don't have? They own nothing.
Right.
Okay. When I look across Harlem, and there's a lot of wealth here. There's a lot of people that own businesses. There's a lot of people that own their apartments. There's a lot of people that own buildings. But what we also have is we have a lot of developers. We have a lot of gentrifiers. We have a lot of other stuff coming in. And our rents have, doubled, tripled inside of a decade. Like a one bedroom was about 900 in 2010. A one bedroom right now will run you 1,800 to 2,100 here, but the prices are collapsing because of what's happening to the city. I mean, they did defund the police. And after defunding the police, what happened there? Well, all the crime units got disbanded. So now our crime is up 300% in the city. Okay. So if you want to fix that, you want to fix policing, you got to change it to community policing, make the cops live in the neighborhoods they work in, change it so that, we have some foot patrols, make sure that they're fully engaged with the community again. Change some of these policies, like we just need to end the military training of our cops. Why are we using foreign governments to use military training for takedown procedures? Why can't we use takedown procedures that are taught by American ex-military here, where we're using things like Aikido, or a variety of other takedown methods that don't necessarily involve keeping people prone and putting weight on their freaking necks, right?
I want to say, Oz, I want to break in and say, like there was a situation up, I think it was in Rochester, where a man was, killed by some police officers.
Mm-hmm.
But he was going through some mental issues. Now, I don't know why do we call out the cops on that, and why don't we have somebody with like a medical degree come out there and try to see if they can go ahead and calm down the situation, calm down the person who's not even armed. Go over there, try to calm it down.
That's not the way any of this works, because we don't see. Here's the thing. I've talked to a bunch of Marxists and communists recently. I've been on a bunch of live streams. And everyone kind of presumes that there's this magical budget out there to do all this stuff. Okay. The cops they're basically the first line of defense for a response for all of these things, whether you want to look at it either way. In some communities, they're looking at it defensively. In other communities, they're looking at it responsibly. But the challenge that you have is that there's no budget for those kinds of things. And the cities are not organized that way, and the states aren't organized that way. So what happens is that your cops end up having to perform about like 10 or 15 different duties. But over the course of the past couple of years, what has happened is that they've basically been turned into one of two things. You have your regular level cops who are basically, this is like a defensive layer. You got SWAT up here, which is, counterterrorism, counter riot, that sort of thing. And there's sort of nothing in between. Inside of those two types of operational modes. So like if we're going to fix that kind of stuff, the first thing that has to happen is they have to have resources afforded to them, and they have to live inside of the communities. But they are the only ones that are providing those types of things, because there's no budget from the state levels for those.
I just think there should be somebody in the unit that, it's kind of like talking somebody, negotiator, talking somebody off the ledge. You got to have one of those people inside that unit to come out if it's a person that is suffering from a mental issue with no weapons, not armed. You need to have that person speaking to the person in need, and not 7 cops coming up to him and putting something over his head.
Well, that's part of police reform. I mean, it comes to that, like, look, when you only have one number you call and one group of people that you need to dispatch, we need to go back to the 90s. Police reform means having block captains. Police reform means, having the block watch. Police reform means that you have someone locally where something like that happens and the cops come, they could basically talk to like the mom on the block, or, whoever your block captain is.
Correct.
And that person can be like, look, that's not a bad kid, but he's going through a lot of things right now. His parents divorced, and he's got mental issues and he stopped taking his meds. You know, that kind of community level engagement needs to be put back in, and that stuff was taken out largely by you know, it was largely taken out by mayors over the course of the past couple decades. And then the other thing, look at what de Blasio is doing right now. I mean, they're cutting mental health care budgets, and they're putting
Absolutely.
people in the streets. Bloomberg did this before him. Okay. And then prior to that, we had that done by, you know, we had that done under God, what was his name? He was that replacement mayor that replacement governor that we had for a couple of years. But the
Oh,
problem is that
Patterson.
yeah, Patterson. Yeah, so Patterson. So, you know, consistently what they do, and this is also a problem with Democratic administrations or independent administrations, is that they cut these mental health budgets. So you want to fix these things, you have to look at like, okay, what do we have deployed that can engage with this one? It is the police. The police are the high touch inside of the community. Everything else that people talk about, like I see these cute little cartoons, they're like, you know, take these things away from the police and put them in these other things. All right, cool. Then you design an emergency response system with, you know, one number and a dispatch plus budget plus state staffing to deploy that across an entire state. It doesn't exist. It's not possible right now.
You said
So
something about Bitcoin and having, having people get into Bitcoin right now. But how do you get people to come into Bitcoin if there's no like seriously, like you have a family of four you mentioned
mhm,
earlier. We know the situation going on right now with COVID, jobs, what is it, like 39 million people unemployed?
mhm.
You know, how do you how do we go ahead and preach? And I'm big on Bitcoin, obviously, I'm a Bitcoiner, but how do we preach buy Bitcoin when people are looking, to go ahead and find food to go ahead and make it through the week? You know, I'm talking about for us in New York. Like seriously, like
Mhm.
you look around New York, there's people like they're literally out of a job because the mom and pop store closed down because they didn't get that PPP money
Yeah.
that these small businesses got. So how do we sit here and say buy Bitcoin though?
Well,
And
I
how do
think
we
what you're
have
talking
people
about is
wishing
get
on
yourself
Twitter?
stable. Get
Yeah, no,
yourself
I get it.
stable, then
My whole thing is
invest
with
your
the
way
Twitter
out.
crowd, the crypto Twitter crowd that says buy Bitcoin and I hope the economy crashes. I have a big beef with that. Like
I have a
economy crash.
total beef with that, but you know, there's no difference in between those dudes and the hipsters
Yeah,
that, you know, hop on with Antifa and like come into black neighborhoods and scream under the banner of Black Lives Matter and destroy. I mean, it's a
yeah,
second Tulsa. You know,
yeah,
you had a bunch of like white suburban kids that are calling themselves Marxist, communist, and anarchist coming in and destroying the neighborhood. You have a bunch of kids that, I mean, it's disaster tourism is what it is,
yeah.
you know, because it's like, oh, I support black people and black lives, I'm going to go and torch a neighborhood. Okay, well, how is that different than Tulsa? Like, how exactly is it different than the race riots? Because all you did was you took away people's livelihoods, you took away their neighborhoods, you took away their access to food, you took away a lot of things, and you disenfranchised them, but under the moniker of we're helping you. And that's what, you know, the issue that a lot of black people have with Black Lives Matter right now, because if Black Lives mattered, then it would be pushing for policy. Okay, if the BLM organization was really trying to affect change, they wouldn't be taking millions of dollars. And the first issue that they're pushing is, like, you know, LGBTQIA rights and trans rights. What happened to actually making black people matter? Because if you look at this legislatively, right, you know, LGBTQ people were basically, they had a civil statute, you know, but they weren't treated the same way under the law, so that the law was changed. But the problem that black people see consistently in America is, you know, with the Lynch Act and with the Constitution still saying 3/5 of a man, a lot of black people feel disenfranchised inside of this, and they see that instead of it being, you know, treated as murder in many cases, it's treated as a violation of their civil rights, right? So their perspective is that consistently, unless you change those sort of foundational laws, they themselves don't have equal rights, at least in the standing of the law and the standing of the courts and the standing as Americans. And then above and beyond that, it's just everything that we've had for about 50 or 60 years, in many cases under, you know, Democrat leadership of some of these cities. And like, it's not chastising the Democrats, it's just pointing out that, look, if you're going to say that you are standing with these people, well, then you better put programs in place, you better put policy in place that helps them rise the way that we help kids in the suburbs rise. You know, why don't I have funding for FIRST Robotics or the US Cybersecurity Challenge or any of these other things that I want to bring into the schools? Why is it so difficult when I've discussed stuff with the Board of Education many times to see if I can get like $3,000 allocated, and I'll just bring the government program in myself because they have to have a proctor, and that proctor has to be like some teacher that just does this after school, and we can't bring in a charity to donate that money. You know, these are the systemic issues that we've got to tackle.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. I keep thinking about the fact that, you know, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we have, you know, sometimes we hear people of other races who are not minorities, and they try to hijack that and say all lives matter. But again, like you mentioned before, you know, it comes down to access to information and to, you know, owning property and to owning something so that you can leverage it and you know, benefit yourself. You know, how is this changing, or is people's perception of money and data and education, is it changing? Or
It has to change. And you know, I've had some conversations with Brittany Kaiser, you know, and I think what you're going to see is I've advocated for a long period of time that UBI should be utilized to give people a stipend based upon the utilization of their data. And I think the fair way to do that is looking at all these companies that are basically stealing your data through, you know, browsers, through devices that they're charging you for. You know, you pay for your phone from that manufacturer, and you pay for a big data plan, and you pay to have your data shared out. And so our thought was that if there's a piece of federal legislation or even state-based legislation that could be introduced, and this is something I might pursue in Albany, but we're looking into the development of the policy right now, and you were to put a data collection fee down on corporations across America, okay, because Facebook makes about $45 per user per year, and that's not including a variety of different other factors where they can make well over $100 per user. All right. And so you consider, well, how many Facebook users are there in New York? Well, there's probably a couple million. So you see where that goes. And so the idea is if you could put some sort of a fee structure in. I don't know if you call it a tariff, I don't know what you call it, but if you are able to say that, like, look, if you're using these platforms and they are collecting your data, and we as you know, a state or the government are able to ensure your privacy, my perspective is that you should be able to be paid for that. And because of the amount of data that's being collected out there by the different organizations, and, you know, like, look, when Equifax is hacked, you know, your data is put at risk, but you're never compensated for that. And a ton of people get identity theft and these types of things. You should actually be compensated by these companies, you know, prior to breaches for just the utilization of that data, because it's almost like profit sharing. And if we did something like that, you could actually issue most Americans $1,000 per month UBI check, okay? But what that also does is that puts checks and balances on the data utilization that's out there, and that moves us towards things like blockchain. And Yang had some interesting ideas. This is how you could put it into play practically, okay? And then from here, there's a utility of maybe even gamifying it if people want to opt into data collection systems, you know, because we're going to be collecting biometric data on absolutely everybody out there, especially where they're moving inside of, you know, COVID. So the big challenge, I think, is if all of that is going to exist and people are going to be put at risk, because in many cases, like, look at Atlanta. Atlanta was saying that they're gonna require some administrator to collect all this test data, and they have no cybersecurity plan. They have no way of, like, securitize. I mean, it's like, you're going to give some guy who's paid like $45,000 a year, or some gal who's paid like $45,000 a year, access to all of this privileged information that people have inside of one locality, and they're not even saying how they're going to store it or anything like that. A lot of this might be on paper. I mean, this is highly problematic. So you start looking at these types of systems and you say, all right, yeah, let's call it a data tariff. You know, let's say that companies that are collecting all this data have to pay the data tariff, and the data tariff is paid through, you know, it could be administered through, I don't know, HHS or something like that, and that's paid out to people in some sort of stipend. But people would ideally be getting anywhere between like 400 or 500 to, you know, maybe 1,000, 2,000 a month. But what that does is that creates your UBI. Okay, that builds into the ecosystem, and that's something that easily be put on the blockchain, and it also ensures that companies aren't being, you know, onerous with their data. It also ensures things like they're not selling their data to China, or that they're not selling their data to other countries where it can be mined and used against us, and it also provides, you know, kind of a degree of national security there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how you would start basically disrupting some of those data paradigms. And then you touched on all lives matter. Look, Americans are scared, and really I think that that's a knee-jerk reaction from people saying like, well, you're saying they matter, well, what about me? Okay, and you know, some of these people are racially insensitive, and some of these people don't care. But I'm going to tell you that what you have is typically, if you make one group special, then the other group feels less special. Okay, and that's what that reaction is largely. It's not necessarily always racist, but it's fear. Okay, it's people fearing that they themselves are becoming ostracized inside of the conversation, and if you want to assuage that, you know, if you want to assuage that, then the best way to do that is to basically allow people to understand how you're going to solve things from a fiscal equity perspective.
Mm-hmm. You touched, you know, on that sort of perspective. You know, I think that's obviously a problem that limits change. Do you think that, you know, by, you know, the other topic you mentioned there about, you know, tying in biometrics, do you think that sort of thing and using people's data will sort of even the playing field for people, you know, when it comes to, you know, helping the Black Lives Matter movement, and to, you know, just, you know, creating a foundation for everyone to be based off of with their data?
You know, I'll tell you this, like the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's two things. I think we have to move away from that, okay? What this comes down to is equity for all Americans.
Mhm.
That's what you need to be talking about. But it's not about supporting the Black Lives Movement or helping the Black Lives Movement. I think the issue of that BLM raises is valid. I think the Black Lives Matter Foundation has a lot of problems with it, and what I'd like to do is move away from that. What I'm focused on is, if you want to promote financial equity, okay, you have to fix financial equity for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that can start with Black communities, but that has to go to poor white communities, that has to go to poor Chicano communities, that has to go to poor Latino communities, that has to go to poor Native communities, it has to go to all of them, okay? It is the same emblematic problem across the lands. It's also the same problem that you have in Canada, all right?
Yeah.
Inside of impoverished communities, it's identical.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to fix it, don't focus on BLM. You know, BLM's a canard inside of this. What it is the issue that BLM raises is that there should be equal rights, and there should be a demilitarization of police. Okay, so those are the only two issues, and I think we've talked about that. But the rest of this is an issue for all Americans. This is an issue where we need economic equity, and that economic equity has to be brought three ways. It has to be brought through the access to education, so people can level up into jobs. It has to be provided through the access to those jobs with corporations. You know, Google has said they're investing $175 million in Black communities. My challenge to Google is get a hold of someone like me. Let's do a use case. You know, let's figure out how that stuff works. But at the same point in time, we're going back to the Microsoft world of the year 2000, where I could go and get a bunch of certificates and I can go and get that job. I don't need to go to college anymore. Okay.
Right.
And that's everywhere from Microsoft with Azure certificates to now Google with all of their competency and completion certificates. There's Oracle has some of these right now. A lot of these big companies have these things, and that's what we need to bring in from a tech perspective, from light manufacturing and a variety of other jobs that are out there. Specialized welding. We need to have the trade education that comes in, and a lot of this is going to come from the federal opportunity zones that start deploying in 21. But that's what really starts to fix this. Okay,
I think that's the big
that's where
problem,
it is.
Oz. I think that's the big problem. You mentioned something about hey, we're gonna go ahead and donate $175 million,
Mhm.
but here you go, and like, who does it go to, and where's the
Yeah,
plan, and where's the strategy? Like, they don't give it to somebody who's actually in the community, like yourself. Like, put somebody like yourself uh, in that group that receives that 175, and you'll have a detailed plan stating how you should go ahead and give it out inside of your community.
exactly. But and what does that mean across the United States? I mean, everyone puts all this lip service up. Nike has donated $200 million to Black Lives Matter. What does that mean? And if you've donated that much money to a foundation, why hasn't the Black Lives Matter Foundation put that money into Black communities? Where's that money going? Okay. Why is it that the causes that they're supporting are Marxist? Because I'm going to tell you, you go and you talk to Black people in Black communities, and I live in a largely Black community. People want opportunities to entrepreneurship. People want that dignity. People want to build a leg up. People want to create and to demonstrate to their community that they've become successful. What people don't want is more handouts, because that's what's kept people down. Because right now, in between welfare, food stamps, Section 8, and God forbid that you're inside of the homeless sector, you basically have people running around in a circle all month. If you want to talk about childcare credits and that sort of stuff, just running in between these things. And then you have them doing busy work to make sure that they get these things. So they may have to do like a ton of volunteer work. Now, that's not helping them build skill sets. That's not helping them get another job. What that is basically saying, I have given you some monies, so I dare say I feel that you should do some penance for this. It's that kind of an antediluvian attitude that really needs to be sort of removed from these processes, and that's nationwide,
Yeah.
and that's policies that went in under Clinton, right? A lot of these things shouldn't have changed, but now we have these policies, and so the only way that you're going to disrupt them is by doing something like what I'm doing, which is you got to run for office. And I strongly, it's ozforny.com. I strongly advise like your viewers go take a look at like my issues and what I'm trying to push for. You find it the kindness of your heart to make a donation, please make a donation. And you want to reach out to me on Twitter. You have an organization, you have a company, you have a nonprofit that we can get involved with. We are trying to create a template here in Harlem. That's the goal. The reason I launched a nonprofit is because I could provide some of the services that we'll never be able to get through the state. And the reason I'm running for office is because if we're able to shift, it's policy and appropriations, then it's laws. Everyone talks about changing laws. I'm like, all you have to do is change some of the policies and committees, and you have to figure out how to change some of the appropriations so that the money is going to the right places. Because we have these CBOs that are, audit the CBOs, right? The community-based organizations. Like, why are they receiving all this money and they're not giving, it doesn't trickle down? And then you have tons of these CBOs where, let's say the state had money to educate 1,000 kids on cybersecurity, right? And the CBO will go and take the money and they'll educate 100 kids and they'll take some pictures and some other stuff. And the remainder of the money will be paid out in bonuses to their management. So, it's these types of things. It's the fact that like, you're going to educate 1,000 kids, you're getting the money to educate 1,000 kids, educate a goddamn 1,000 kids. Okay. Don't dicker around with that kind of stuff. But that's what they do.
So do the platforms exist right now where you could take funding and you could encourage entrepreneurship and you could encourage education outside of college that is streamlined for people to change their lives? Do those platforms exist?
To a degree, we're creating one with with my nonprofit. But the larger challenges is that what does exist has to be brought in, and people have to be educated on it. Like I just did a we recorded a kind of, I guess it's like an educational webinar, but it's like a podcast with Alexandra Fazzulo. And, you know, she's figured out gig economy wise how to make well over, you know, $300,000 a year by using Fiverr. Okay. And some of the copywriting skills and things like that. And so one is that you have to impart that kind of information to people to understand that, like, okay, for just from where you're doing with the skills that you have, that there's the opportunity to find a tremendous amount of gigs. And, you know, you're going to have to level up, you're going to have to build, it's going to take some time. But the other pieces of this, you know, have to, I think, go after like more of the further disenfranchised in the community. You know, the homeless need to have access to some of these platforms, and that's why we've created a nonprofit, because you have to bring them all together. Like the initial idea that we have is if I can bring all the data to one place, that starts it. But some of the platforms do exist here, to your question, but most of them, they're impossible for people to find.
Right.
And that kind of visibility needs to be raised.
Is there integration with any of this with the platform you support, Own Your Data Foundation?
You know, I support a bunch of different Own Your Data initiatives. With PAC Global, we have an initiative to own your data. I definitely support that one. Brittany Kaiser's foundation, I definitely support, but I think they need to be pushing more policy perspectives. Caitlin Long, you know, I support what she's done in Wyoming. I support the initiatives that we've done in Rhode Island that push what Caitlin has done in Wyoming, as well as some of the legislation. You know, I support that in Texas with the Texas Hemp Educational Organization. And in here, for what we're doing, I think I support it from the perspective of what I stated from a UBI concept, you know, what we can create. Because if you create a data tariff for these corporations, you know, that are collecting so much data and profiting so handsomely and paying their shareholders so handsomely, what you do is you basically have that UBI stipend going back to the people. Because if we're disrupting Social Security and a variety of these other things, and we're just going to let people basically become like serfs that you're going to harvest their data off of, then it might as well be compensated for it. And I think that is a Republican ideal, you know. I think the fact that if you're going to have people participating inside of the economies in these brand new ways, you have to think about this from the perspective of how do we allow people to actually benefit from the ecosystems in which they're participating, right? Because we have to stop thinking about this with this 1980s economic mindset that most people have. Incentives coming from, you know, Trump's executive orders on opportunity zones, and say something to the degree of like, okay, if you educate yourself and you do this, you could level up into you know, making this much money, but you're also collecting your UBI check. Your UBI check is never, you know, never not paid, because the companies are going to be consistently collecting your data. But what it does do is it gives people that a little bit of safety net, you know, that one little bit of safety net that they're looking for. And this could be very much like what happened after 1929, where we had to create the CCC, the Job Corps, all these other things to give people safety nets.
I think everybody should get a UBI. You know, I was against it, but like I believe now with everything that's gone on, I think people should be given a UBI, just in general. You might disagree with that, but I just believe. I'm not talking about people that are making like $300,000 and over. I'm talking about, you know, people that are, you know, making $30,000 a year. That extra $1,000 for them to go ahead and get an extra $1,000 would help them, and
I'll
also
take a
would
below that. It's
help the
people who are
economy.
making 14,000 to 30,000. Those
Yeah.
are the ones it's going to help the most.
Well, that's who needs it, and we should, you know, instead of giving, you know, billions of dollars off to Wall Street, you know, it's time for us to go ahead and give some money back to the community so they can get off their feet and they can go ahead and do something. I mean, imagine a single mother, 3 kids, like, you know, working a job where she's getting paid $17 an hour or whatever it is. You know, like that's not enough in New York. Like I speak for New York. Like, yeah, we can go to other states where the taxes aren't high. I'm talking about New York, where the taxes are ridiculous, rent is ridiculous. You send us a stimulus check for $1,200. Rent is, like you said earlier, for a 1-bedroom apartment, it's almost like around $2,100. I'll
Yep.
say, okay? And that's not
Yep.
even including electricity and stuff. And that's not including food. And that's not including a lot of stuff. And then you
Mhm.
got kids. What is that $1,200 doing for you? Nothing. I
Yeah.
understand the concept. It's a nice thing, but we need to go. If we're giving, how much money have the big corporations? And I have nothing against them. God bless everybody. This is a capitalistic society. Go ahead and capitalize. I'm all for it. But we need to also give back to the people at the
Well,
same
in
time.
giving back to
This
the
time,
people, I think that's a good segue to my second blockchain idea. So my second blockchain idea is that if you look at the if you look at the child payment
and real
system.
quick, and
Mm.
this is not a handout. I'm not talking about giving somebody a handout.
I
What I'm
wasn't saying
saying,
a handout either. I think you and I
you
are
know,
in sync in the
I don't
fact
want the
that
audience to get, I don't want the audience to get confused. I'm not talking about UBI as a handout. We're talking about people that are struggling that need it. And once they go ahead and get out of that certain bracket, then you can go ahead and take that away. But
well, then what you're talking is you're going back to workfare. Okay, so under the Reagan
uh,
administration,
uh,
well, I mean, think about this. Okay, get pissed off all you want, but it's really this: if someone is making $14,000 to $30,000 a year, they got to pay for childcare. Okay, they
yeah,
have to pay for health insurance. They have to now pay for way more expensive food than they had to before,
of
and this is
course.
going to go well on into 2028. Okay, those three issues are going to be there by the Clintons basically making one promise to bring a unionization in for minimum wage workers, but breaking that promise and then taking away the existing unions that they had, and then moving it towards an $18 an hour minimum wage, which they keep targeting higher and higher and higher. Okay, what they've done is they've pushed people out of the income brackets that they were in before, where the federal programs actually existed to make sure that they didn't fall financially. So now that
Correct.
that safety net is freaking gone, yeah, the only things that you can do is we have my data UBI idea, your idea, which is basically, you know, modified workfare, okay, which is like if you're earning this to this, let's give you UBI, but let's also offer you services, okay?
No, but let's, if you get a job, Oz, if you like, you build a company, there's jobs now. We build jobs, and we can offer that person that was making $14 to $17 an hour a job to where they go from making $24,000 a year to, let's say, $50,000 a year.
But that's
And
what the
so,
training piece is about. You're going to have to get them retrained to get them into those jobs, and that's
but
where
but
the Google
but for the
certificate
time
program.
being, as they're being trained, and we get the 175 million from Google and all these companies
No,
that
no, no,
love to
but
build.
just beyond Google, like just the certificate
Okay,
programs out there to train
fine.
people.
But my thing is, get them trained, get these people trained, because most people want to work. I don't believe
Mm,
that people don't want to work. People just don't have the opportunity. So those
correct.
people, they go
Absolutely
ahead, they
correct.
get a job, they get trained, they get into a job. Now they've gone from 24,000 to, let's say, 60,000. That UBI has to be cut off and given to somebody else now. Repeat.
Well,
So
that's where you're going
that,
to need a blockchain system in there, but that also goes into what I was going to touch on from a child care payment system. So right now, having to basically pay child support is a double dip onerous situation that creates debtors prisons and keeps a tremendous amount of Americans from actually wanting to work. And what I found out from talking to some of my constituents is there's constituents I have been double dipped, where like because the kid had moved from New York to the state of Delaware with the mother, the New York was collecting and Delaware was collecting. So now it's like Delaware owes him 32,000, but in order to get that 32,000 released, because he's been paying childcare for like 5, 6 years and now has custody of his kid. Um, he has to go to state one to push the state two. So it becomes like these Kafka nightmares for a
yeah,
lot of Americans. And when there's 2 and 3 kids, you're talking impoverished. Okay, now you're talking 2 and 3 kids. And there's guys who will get their entire check garnished, you know? So they'll go and they'll work for 2 weeks and they'll have a check for like $50. And if you don't pay the child support, they'll stick you in debtor's prison in New
yeah,
York. Okay. So that kind of stuff needs to be reformed. Like if you really want to fix this and you want to fix the UBI issues, you do data UBI through a data tariff. Okay. And we can do this on the state level and we can make sure that people are compensated, but it needs a blockchain on it. Then you
yeah,
can fix this child care payment and really the child support issue, which is keeping a lot of people down, because the other problem is if the state collects $600, okay, for the child, which let's call it, so the first child's 17% of whatever you make after taxes. All right. So they've taken 40%. Now they're taking 20%. And in many cases, what you'll have is you'll have the mother has a house and can afford cars and things. And the father is really kind of, pushing like mac and cheese for dinner and trying to get a used car and renting. There has to be a more equitable way to make sure that the kids are taken care of in a very fair fashion. But at the same time, that it doesn't disenfranchise one parent to the degree that they become financially destitute. And
Yeah.
if there's a difference of at least $100 in terms of what you pay to the state and what's paid out to the parents, well, then the cost there is the state's processing. So again, that goes to the issues of the blockchain. If we can remove a lot of the overhead with this, like, look, the city's planning on cutting 22,000 jobs. Okay. So what we have to do is we have to utilize what we have, which is technology solutions that could be implemented into the state to actually reduce all of this massive overhead. And at the same point in time, make sure that people are being treated fairly inside of this, that the laws are applying fairly in terms of how these support payments go. Because you fix the support payments, you fix the UBI piece, you fix the education that layers on top of that so that people can get the better jobs, right? And then the only other things that you have to start looking at are how do you hold a community together? And that's going to a lot of faith, that's going to a lot of family, that's going to making sure that the state funding that's coming in for faith organizations is there. Because look, we don't, in many of our communities, we don't necessarily have community centers and these types of things, but what we do is we have churches, we have mosques, and we have synagogues. And they provide not just after school latchkey type services, they provide the before school feeding in many cases, because there's a lot of food there and that addresses the food insecurity issues. But AA programs are there. You'll have churches, synagogues right now, the mosques are getting into it, that are doing some of the drug rehabilitation programs inside of the community. And then, it's just really a lot of the community engagement where people get together. This is what you have to support. And I see a lot of people like saying, oh, remove their tax credits and this and that and everything else. And I'm like, do you know what these organizations do? Okay. Do you know what they give back to the communities? And they always say, replace it with this, replace it with that. Look, take what actually exists and make it work better. Don't replace it. Because every single time someone's tried to rip out a program, put another one in, it turns into a mess. So if you could just take what's actually working right now and elaborate upon it and start building in the communities, especially in the time of COVID, okay? Because some of our churches are the only places that are providing free COVID testing centers working with the city. And there's a handful of CBOs, but that's all you got, and it's going to get worse. And so if we're going to do this right, you have to work with the organizations and you have to really support rebuilding families and supporting families and making sure that they don't end up in destitute situations. And really, last piece policy-wise is you want to fix homelessness, you got to fix the Department of Homelessness. And fixing the Department of Homelessness really means, potentially, again, another blockchain solution, but really auditing the expenditures. Like why is it that there are shelters in New York, okay, where they're paying the shelter $5,000 a bunk, which means $10,000 a bunk bed per month to house people, homeless people, but you're doing it in bunk beds. So that means that sexual assaults on females happen. That means that the assault on kids happen. That means that fist fights happen. Why is it at $5,000 per person? Like, you could give them we could literally have city built housing at that price that was amortized in over the course of years, or you could give them a couple thousand, you could give them a couple $1,000 to get housing. And some of these programs exist, but they can't find the housing because they have to run around with a voucher trying to say, hey, well, can I rent from you? That sort of a thing. You got to fix that process inside of it. And why are we paying $200 a night to put homeless people in hotels? Like, why is the state paying that? Why is it that we have hundreds of millions of dollars being paid into a system that is just making certain people rich, but keeping the homeless from ever like coming up? If you can reform that, okay, and inside of the policies that I just kind of laid out, that all of this stuff together, these are Republican ideals to fix all of this gross spending, to remove all of these problems, to ameliorate, everything for the citizenry so that they can come up. That should be kind of the template of what we have as reform Republicans to really kind of build towards the future, because we're in a recession now. And this is way bigger than what we had in 29. That was a 1% drop in GDP. We had like a 30% drop in GDP, So
Yeah,
to fix these things, we need to radically rethink like how we approach policy.
What happens, Oz, if before the end of the year, Congress releases a US digital dollar on blockchain with no supply limit? How does that affect all of this?
Well, I don't know about the no supply limit, okay? But
yeah, that may or may not happen. Who knows?
I mean, I don't want to go into the hypotheticals of how the digital dollar is going to be rolled out, but the digital dollar is coming. It's coming for 3 reasons. COVID is not going to want to have anyone touching money. 2 is they're looking at documentation, but the problem that you are going to still have is the digital divide, okay? Because I've got anyone who was ever incarcerated, and this was in communities across America, and these are poor to moderately I would say moderately affluent communities of any race across America. You got these problems. Why? Because it was the crack epidemic before, but now it's the fentanyl and heroin epidemic, and they're all affected, and a lot of suburbs are affected. So you want to really tackle the issue of the fact that anyone who has been incarcerated can't open a bank account. You want to roll out digital dollars, you're going to have to figure out ways that anyone can ubiquitously get access to digital dollars, because that's going to be one problem of it. The other problem you're going to have is adoption, okay? Because now what we're talking about is moving people to hard and soft wallets for their currency. And, there's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong, for people to screw things up, because they can't put, money in a shoebox under their bed. They can't, the custody questions are really sort of there. So let's say a digital dollar does come this year, and it's coming next year. But when a digital dollar does come, we're going to have to shift to the paradigm of like the Starbucks app. And that's probably the easiest way for people to do this, and sending money like Cash App, those types of things. That would promote the type of adoption I think we're looking for. And at the same point in time, that would really foster growth in communities, because now what those types of things in crypto, that basically gives you a cash register, right? Mm-hmm. A Cash App gives you a cash register. I can pay someone for a service. I can pay someone to do remodeling in my house. I can do all these different things. I've bought kettlebells on Craigslist, and I've paid through Cash App. Yeah. So that has to be the paradigm shift, and then you start getting mass adoption.
Mm-hmm. So if that were to come out in an app and it worked and it was effective, would it make sense to tie someone's digital identity and biometrics into that same app?
It depends. I mean, I think there's a question of privacy. There's a question of who's doing it. There's a lot of questions around digital identity right now inside of the United States, and I think internationally. If you bring something in, you need to have a standard by which it's reasonably secure. Something from a pretty good privacy key, like a PGP key up. But that has to have a lot of thought that goes inside of it. Now, what's probably going to happen is they're going to try and ramrod stuff through, because they're going to try and shift people over. I think digital identity should be phased in over the course of 4 phases. The first phase is that you may have some sort of biometric ticker or something like that that actually allows you into that wallet, in addition to a passcode or 2-factor. Okay. But a lot of people aren't going to want that, because people want simplicity. People, put their thumb and they use Apple Pay, right? So I think that's your first level. The next levels beyond that are the development of a standard for digital identity. And IEEE and a variety of different standards organizations really need to up their game in terms of this. And then I think you're going to have 2 questions. One is, we're a republic. So are there state level digital IDs? Are there federal digital IDs? Do you have multiple? And how does this work for you in terms of a lot of the economy that is disenfranchised by the digital divide? Like, a lot of people are, and this would be, again, this is not a race issue, but I would say that there's probably about 30 to 40 million impoverished Americans who are on what used to be called Obama phones, but they're now Trump phones, and they've been
Yeah.
updated, and it's now a smartphone and not like a jitterbug. So those folks need to have reasonably easy access to the utility of payment and a variety of other things. And then there's ADA requirements that people are going to need to think about rolling out an app, not just from the visibility, but the access applicability of this. Like, there's a lot of considerations, because you're going from something that's like, I'm rolling out an app and I'm going to call it, Foodie, and Foodie allows you to order from, all of the different grocery stores around you. It's something that has a tremendous amount of usability concerns on it, and it's going to have, federal guidelines. So it could work in theory, but very much like what has been done previously, it's going to need a big federal push behind it. It's going to need advertising campaigns, and it's going to need a lot of education, and really more of train the trainer, like train people how to do it, and then maybe put some sort of federal dollars behind that to educate people inside of communities how to utilize these things. But it's a paradigm shift, from merchant processing to merchants to businesses to people. And that's really the big question, from a federal policy perspective. How does that shift? And how does it incorporate what I just outlined in order to make it actually successful?
I don't know. I definitely think the digital dollar is coming.
Mhm.
Obviously, I don't know when. Probably during the next, even though they said there's no second wave, this is still the wave. Well, within the next 6 months, I can see them roll it out. Anyway, none of us. I don't use money. I mean, I use my phone to go ahead
Mhm.
and pay for everything. So at the end of the day, I don't think it should be that difficult. But I understand we got the boomers, so they
So not
might
the
find it.
boomers. It's a lot of. I use money in my community. Okay, I mean, remember in New York we have some stores like Joe the Juice that don't
Yeah,
even take cash, and then we have a lot of small businesses that do take cash. And remember, the reason that they do take cash is like, look, you want to go to the best Italian meatball place, that place might be in cash. You want to go to the
yeah.
best rib shack, that place might be in cash. You want to go to your local soul food joint, that might be in cash. You want to go to that taqueria that you've been wanting to go to for friggin' 6 months, that might be in cash. And a lot of this is because of the processing fees that you have for this. Because
Of course.
you look at any small bodega all over New York, and they're like, if you pay cash, there's like a 4 to 5% discount on whatever product you're buying because you're paying cash. And there's an upcharge if you're paying credit on those types of things. Because in
You know what
addition
I've
to
seen now lately though, like
Mm.
if you use a credit card and not cash, they're charging you like whatever the merchant's charging you.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
a lot of them will say, "Hey, you're paying a 3.9% fee on this, charge," and you're like, "Wait, what? Hold on." And that
Because they
entices
were
people
they
to
were
go ahead
paying
and
that
take out
before.
cash.
I think that's fair, but at the same time, it's like, okay, that fee is there. Why should the merchant have to pay for it unless that is discussed on another level? Like those
No,
fees
that's how
are
merchant services work. You want to have a credit card terminal inside of your store.
yeah,
You're paying the merchant fee, you're paying a transaction fee, and you're paying a chargeback fee.
yeah.
So you're losing somewhere about 10 to 14% on average of anything that you run through that store by utilizing credit.
Hmm.
Okay, debit's a different factor, but there's still a merchant fee on top of that. That's somewhere between 3 to 7%, depending who you got your card terminal through.
Yeah, that's true. That's a big hit.
You
Huge.
know, so
Especially
so that
again,
that's
like
another
I'm
that's
telling you, I've
another.
never seen that before. Where I've gone into a store and they're like, "Listen, you're using this. We got to charge you 4%
Mm.
on top of." I'm like, "Whoa, all right. We're already getting taxed like 200% here." Well, F
Well,
it.
what you're
Yeah,
doing, what they decided was, I think a lot of it's if Venmo is going to charge you the merchant fee for transacting, then they can charge you the merchant fee that they've been paying for you that they had to cover in order to give you the privilege of utilizing that digital payment method.
yeah.
Um,
Imagine coming up to Canada. In my province, we pay 5% government sales tax. You go over to Ontario, you pay a total with the government and a harmonized sales tax of 13% on everything you buy.
mhm.
What's your rate in New York there?
It sounds like New York.
No, they have VAT up there.
It's
I'm just
it's
saying the
wild.
tax is horrible.
They have
How'd you pay that?
you guys have value added tax up in Canada, and what's interesting is like if you go and you buy something in Canada and you're American, at the border you can get a tax rebate on
Mhm.
stuff. But you know their method of tax is a little different than ours. It's more like the European system.
Yeah.
But here, you know, sales tax varies, and you'll have state and you'll have local. And I mean, you know, New York can get a little pricey in a few things.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, it's nice chatting with you and having you on here. You seem like you have a lot on your agenda. We appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. David, any final questions?
No, I just know Oz. I know, listen, Oz has good intentions in terms of, bringing everybody together and getting shit done. So, for me, it's always a pleasure to speak to him. And obviously, we work together on Pack Global. So, you know, I already know how intelligent the dude is. So, Oz, thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Thank you.
I love hearing the things that you guys are working on with PAC about data management. It's exciting to see when some of that's going to be rolling out soon.
Very soon.
Data, you know, privacy, sharding. I mean, there's an event on the 10th. David, you should pop that link in here too with the podcast.
Yeah.
People should check that
We'll
out.
definitely go ahead and pop it in September 10th. This is going to be a big event. So stay tuned.
Exciting.
Stay tuned.
That's exciting. Well, thanks guys. We'll talk to you again soon. We'll check in with you and have a great day.
All right. Take care, guys.
Oz, have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
And cut. The Blockchain Breakfast podcast is sponsored by Crazy 8 Token, the newest payment solution for casinos and their customers in emerging markets around the world. Crazy 8 Token is powered by the Casino Coin blockchain. For more information, visit crazy8token.com. And also, Futurist Conference, Canada's largest blockchain and emerging technologies event. Register today at futuristconference.com for this virtual event happening November 11th and 12th.